Hi, Ijeoma. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, DiDi? It's good to see you
Listen,
again.
I'm really fabulous. Thank you for asking. I'm here with a whole bunch of people. Hi, a whole bunch of people, and then hi to everyone who is viewing with us on Facebook Live. Um, so I just want to introduce you. I really feel like you're the kind of person that doesn't need an introduction, but maybe, you know what I'm saying? Maybe there's like one person left in the world who doesn't know who the heck you are, right? And so the things that I want to say about Ijeoma, I just feel like if you ever knew someone who knew themselves, that would be who Ijeoma is. Um, Ijeoma is someone that I like to emulate often, as far as in her bio, she considers herself an internet yeller. And that's exactly how I met her. I was yelling on the internet, and so was she. So, Ijeoma, thank you so much for being here today. And I'm just gonna cut to the chase because Black people, well, mostly me, I'm late or whatever. But since you were on time, I want to talk about your book, Be a Revolution. I'm so excited that you wrote this. I'm even more excited that I'm hearing your voice on the Audible as I'm listening. I was like, oh my, right? I'm hearing your voice on the Audible as I'm listening to it driving. And I just want to say thank you again for being here. Do you have anything to say? You don't have to say thank you back.
No, I mean, it's great to be here. I love talking with you. I love talking with Black people. I love, it's just it's great. And thank you for making this space and holding this space for people.
Sure, no problem. So I want to talk to you about your book. First of all, I want to, I, there's something you wrote, well, there's something you wrote and also said, because I'm listening to the audiobook, in the author's note, and you were talking about, I don't want to paraphrase you because I really want it to just come from you. You were talking about inherent harm that we can cause, right, when we're not careful with our words, and then how you, in writing this book, decided to be careful, take care, right? And then also, like, in 20 years, will the language have changed? Then someone come to you and be like, you were problematic, and you said something. You were like, because at the end of the day, and I was like, all right, Glorilla. Like, if you remember on CNN, she was like, well, the day got to end. So, can you explain to us how you took this writing process and you used very specific language and terminology that was important to you?
Yeah, it's the thing about language is, right, it's always changing. And part of what we do when we're trying to address oppression first is to name it, right? And then to also reclaim, our definitions and take them away from oppressive systems as time goes on and we liberate ourselves and, liberate our minds and push back against the ways in which others and other systems have defined us and defined our language, we come up with new words, new terms, and sometimes we have to be really flexible for that. And so I'm sure you all know what it's like to say, oh, this isn't the term we're using now, we're using this term now, or even just the way we think about things can change over time. And I am certainly not arrogant enough to think that at any point in my life, I have it all figured out. And that the way in which even the most progressive areas are talking about something is the way that people are going to be talking about it in the future because we don't know what we don't know. And so for me, part of the care is, right, trying to be as considerate as possible, trying to do as little harm as possible, and then also holding space for the idea that at some point, if we're doing it right and we continue to progress as people, there are things in my book and in everything I do and in everything we all say and do that will be outdated, that will need to be changed. And acknowledging that, being upfront with that, because I think we like to really say this isn't where it should be right now. It's all done and act like we all came out of the womb perfect. We all came out of the womb knowing every word to say and every way to do things.
So
And
unproblematic.
right. And that's not the way that we should move through life. That's certainly not an abolitionist way to move through life, right? To act like, we all have it down and we are all perfect all the time and that no one can afford to mess up. And so trying to be upfront from the beginning of like where what care I did take, why I made the choices I made, and that there's still a very good chance that you're going to go through and find things that hit you a certain way, or in 10 years, a lot of things that just don't work anymore. That's the nature of being a human alive in the world.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. And something I wanted to talk about is the title itself. So when you say be a revolution, I imagine all sorts of people are like, revolution. Oh my, and someone's clutching their pearls, what have you. So, because the title of the book is Be a Revolution, which can conjure images of chaos in the streets and a fiery sky. I love that imagery. Um, but many of the projects you write about are small scale and working within current systems, right? And so I'm wondering, how do you hope the readers define revolution and their part in it? Because I think that that's where you actually developed like this niche, so I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, that was so funny for me because I would say like when I was on my initial big book push, a lot of times when I would be interviewed by white people, they would be like, "Revolution? Really? Why can't you call it anything else? The revolution is so violent. It's so bloody." And like the thing that always cracked me up is like every single person I interviewed works outside of systems or is directly challenging systems, but they're doing so in their communities, right? And all of this is part of revolution. For me, anything that revolutionizes the way in which we interact with each other, the way in which we see society, the way in which we decide to form a society, the way we see ourselves, that is revolutionary. And none of the stuff that you see in the news, that ends up being called a revolution happens without that. We don't just suddenly wake up
Mm.
one day and people are in the streets toppling governments, right? There is this, you have to figure out what you want to build. You have to be working in community. You have to be freeing your mind, right? You have to have goals. You have to figure out what systems are going to replace. You have to figure out how to communicate with each other, provide for each other, heal each other. And that is all so revolutionary. And without that, we are lost. And we've seen
Yeah.
that, right? We have seen the turmoil of governments and systems toppled, and then the absolute carnage that comes after when we haven't done that work, when we haven't been working in community, when we haven't figured out what we want to build. And so for me, like that is the real revolutionary work. And I wanted to show people that. And I wanted to really actually show the difference between what some people call revolutionary work, which is really upholding current systems and tweaking them a little bit, and the work that really is outside, like, and that can be in your family, that can be in your neighborhood, in your school, in your
Because baby,
city.
there's some people in my family that need some work. Okay. So I totally, y'all know what I'm talking about. All right. So I just want to say thank you for that, because it brings me to my next question. And I remember driving in the car. I was actually driving rideshare, right? And I told the person who was my client, I was like, you're gonna have to get this. I said, because I got something to do. I was like, so I'm listening to the Audible. And um something that struck me as really like a poignant point is that you said there's like all this fear mongering, right? That, people in positions of power will tell you, no, 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 it has to be this way. And there's like this fear that, like, if when we're talking about reform versus abolition, and what does abolition mean, right? And you said in the book, you were saying, what is there, like, if this is as bad as it's been, right? Like, how could it get any worse, right? And like, by changing the narrative and by removing carceral systems and other systems of repression, wouldn't that help, And so I guess my question is, by you sharing your own journey to becoming a police and prison abolitionist, you said the reason you didn't get here sooner was our culture's war on imagination. And I think I almost like pulled over because I said, you better, and that's such a powerful statement that you made, the war on imagination. So after writing this book, what more are you yourself able to imagine?
Oh, I mean, that was the thing that was such a gift about working on this book and talking with so many people and finding out all the creative ways in which they're building and caring for community and building new ways of being. um, was it really has had me taking a really, really deep look at my life and seeing opportunity, right? Like saying, how can I live this right now? Like not one day we'll be rid of this, these systems and then we'll live. It's what can I do right now? What can I be doing right now?
Mm,
And so, like the work this has had me doing, even in my family and how I parent, like, am I parenting in an abolitionist way?
right.
Right? Like,
Okay.
do my kids have consent in how this relationship works? What as an employer, am I employing people in an abolitionist way?
Right.
It has me reevaluating the way in which I'm working with other people. And it also has my imagination going, I think it's so easy to identify problems.
Mm,
But what really was underscored for me in this is you don't get anywhere if you also can't imagine your ideal. If you can't imagine what it is you want to build in the end. Like it can be pretty easy to say, this boot is on my neck, right? But to say, what am I going to do when this boot is off my neck? How am I going to live? Who am I going to live with? How am I going to approach someone who maybe isn't in a position of power, but is trying to harm me? Like, what do we do then when it's community? How do we build this in a way that lives up to our ideals? And so I've been thinking about that so much more and like how I do solidarity work, right? And how I communicate with people, how I employ people and work with people. And I start now, instead of saying we have a problem to fix, I start with we have a vision to build. And then the
mm.
question is, what's in the way of that vision? And those are the problems to fix, and it's just such a more beautiful way that keeps us pointed in the right direction.
Thank you so much for that. And also to like press on about that question, right? I'm thinking of the ways in which imagining the world we want to live in, right? That's what I hear a lot in activist spaces. So there are the people that do, right? And we experience burnout. And then there are the people who we need like to help us do, the thinkers, and the dreamers, right? And so how do those groups of people begin to work together, so that way we do have I like that you said that, the foot on the neck, right? Because we can be like reactive, right? And then when we try to put systems in place to replace those systems, we can sometimes inadvertently recreate systems of harm because we're not fully fleshing it out, if that makes sense. So, what do you think is a good way for folks who are interested in social justice work and anti racism work, right? Because everyone should have an anti racist framework. What do you think is the best way for all of us to be able to work together with our different skill sets?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think
Thank
like if
you.
anything, that was like the most like underscored point in the book that was so clear to me. It was like everyone had such different skill sets, right? People were coming to this work in so many different ways. And one thing that was so clear that I felt was like community care really looks like recognizing the skills, the talents, and the needs, the individual needs of everyone in community and working as a community to meet that. And that means that no one is sacrificed to the movement. And this idea that we have like our frontline workers who grind themselves to dust
Right.
and that's their job. And then we have the thinkers who think all day and that's their job. And not, you have this skill set and you're in community with the frontline workers. And we're finding ways, you're maybe putting your imagination to ways that we can get rest, care, healing for frontline workers, right? That we are coming together in that and that we recognize that we're all a part of this. And so what that means though is we really have to, because I do believe this is actually steeped in white supremacy, the idea that there are members of our movement who are sacrificial to the movement, that there is anyone that is supposed to be martyred to a cause. I actually believe that that is a devaluing of the humanity of the people in our work. And we should say, absolutely not. Every single person here deserves care.
Mm,
And that means we will rotate people out. That means that we will pay attention to, how people are living and that they're getting enough rest and food. And, part of that is the way white supremacy has structured the stories of our movements, right? When we think of the Montgomery bus boycott, right? We think of people being out day in, day out, losing their jobs, risking everything. We don't think about the people staying up all night making sandwiches to make sure that people had food to eat, the
mm,
people carpooling to make sure people could get from here to there, people sharing funds so that people could pay their bills. We don't talk about the whole story of how that was able to be sustained as long as it was and successful because it was a community care approach. And the people that were out there risking their jobs were not being sacrificed.
Right.
They were
Okay.
being cared for. They were making people were making sure they could still pay their bills and have a roof over their head and have food and have rest, right? And that those things are written out of our history because often we're not the ones who get to be in control of how our history is talked about. And then it's this idea that some people are sacrificed and some people aren't. And it's so erasive and harmful on multiple levels because it has this idea that, especially our young people are supposed to just grind themselves away and if
Mm.
you're not real to the movement. That our thinkers are never supposed to interact with frontline workers and aren't taking on any risk and aren't having any, and none of that's true. And so a lot of that comes with saying, like, what is in our roots? And I believe this, right, as a Black woman, as a Nigerian American,
Yes.
that community care is in our blood. And
Yes.
that we get pulled away from that by like white supremacist capitalism that says you need to have one hero. You need to do this on your own. You need to stand on your own. You need to be the star of this movie. And instead of leaning into the thing that really has helped us survive in, the most hostile situations, which is how we care for each other and recognize each other.
Ooh, thank you so much. In talking about anti-racism work and also DEI and what seems to be an American crumbling, if you will, of programs and things of that nature. You already know what's happening with critical race theory, and now they're like um, absolving whole departments, right, at corporations. And I remember with the state sanctioned violence of George Floyd in 2020, how Bath and Body Works was sending me emails saying they affirm my Black Lives Matters, right? And now here we are in 2024, and we're dialing back. It's a little bit of a repeal, right? And so where does where does the information and be a revolution fit in for people who become apathetic or people who feel like, oh, there's just so many things to be worrying about in the world. I can't worry about racial justice anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because
You know,
I'm
I mean,
coming for everybody.
right, right. And I think like that's the thing that, I don't think any of us were shocked, right? If you've been in this work for a while, of how short that was going to be. And in fact, the US government just announced, I think, was it yesterday, that they're cutting their government DEI program. Like that
Oh,
department is actually being dissolved. Um, None of that is shocking. We are always, promises made to us by white supremacist systems will never be held. And, even if they say they mean it, they're putting money into it. All it takes is one person to be shifted, moved, money to change, political will to change, and it's done. And for me, that big lesson is you can't change a system that has white supremacy baked into it. And we have to stop falling for that, for the idea of that.
mm,
And it doesn't mean we don't work in these places. Harm reduction is a real thing, but we have to stop calling harm reduction revolution, right?
ooh,
If you are in a space, if you're on a college campus and you're brought in, you're doing harm reduction. You can't revolutionize that campus.
right.
Like you can't get a paycheck. Absolutely not. Like there's no way they're going to let you. What you can do is while you're there, reduce harm to the young people in that space, to the BIPOC, employees in that space, so that they can do the work they need to do. And hopefully you'll get to do that, to some degree as long as you can. But that system will be the same the moment you leave, right? And that is for any of these systems where it's really baked in. And so we were sold a lot and told it was revolutionary. Like we got a glimpse of our collective power in 2020, right? In at least even getting these corporations and entities to pretend to care. And what they tried to do was throw what they could at us to calm us down
Mhm.
so that they could continue to do what they were doing, right?
Target got a
Or,
chokehold on Black people right
yeah,
now.
forming a committee, building a department. There were never any, by this time we will have this done. We will restructure this. The CEOs stayed the same. The boards all stayed the same. Everything that it needed to run the way it runs stayed the same. And they would toss a couple of Black and brown faces in some strategic spaces and say, here. And because that was so much more at once than we had ever seen before. I'm not even, I get it. Like, I get it. It felt like a lot, you know? And if you're that person getting that job, or if for 2.5 years you had a slightly less racist workspace, that's real, but it's not a revolution. And so I think we have to recognize that, right? That like if we want this to happen, it has to be from the ground up. And we have to be able to measure that progress. We need to have commitments that are always measurable, always actionable.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to have commitments on what the accountability process for that looks like. And we're just not going to find it in systems where that's baked in. And so in those systems, you know, this is what I tell people. I told my partner when he was working in a white entity, I said, honey, you can change people in this place. You can never change the place.
Right.
And so know what your goal is and know that the work that's the work that helps people survive day in and day out in oppressive systems. The work that gets us free will always happen outside of that. And that's where our efforts have to be. And so anything short of we are pulling this part of the system apart is just lip service that they're giving us.
Thank you so much for that. It reminds me of a time that I reached out to you for advice. I was like, I keep getting fired by all of my DEI clients. It's too real over here. And you're like, then you're doing your job because they're not really going to change. And sometimes it makes me sad. So I've actually shifted from DEI work to community care work. So I just really want to say I love you. I'm going to shift and pivot a little bit to one of my other favorite subjects, which is gender-based justice, right? So in that chapter you wrote, quote, Black women are expected to fight for everyone else and stitch our communities back together after white supremacy has torn them from asunder, while also often facing some of the worst systemic racism in very specific ways. Issues like poverty, work discrimination, and exploitation are compounded by our gender. How was it to write about intersectional oppression that affects you so directly? Was it healing, or did it bring more to the surface, or like what happened when you were writing that?
You know, I would say this project was less harmful than like mediocre. Like
Mediocre. Yeah. I was like, poor baby.
mediocre was killing me. Like I love mediocre is one of my favorite books like to exist, honestly. Like that's a book I would have picked up and bought. But the process of being like I remember talking to my partner as I was finishing up, you know, and I'm like, hey, I need notes on this massacre. No, not that massacre, this massacre. Can you get me? I need specific quotes. Oh, you know, like looking through ads. The thing I think that really gutted me was reading through ads of Black people trying to find ways to escape the post-Reconstruction South and putting ads up
Mm-hmm.
and putting things like the quality of their teeth and skin and hair as ways to try to get a white person to say, yes, come up here, I'll give you a job and you can escape this terror. Like I remember reading these, pouring through all of these advertisements that people had to place and just feeling like everything about me was torn apart, you know, just feeling gutted. That project was one where I did swear I was not going to write another book like this for a long time. Because it was also like while we were being swatted in our home, it was while we had to move due to like all this white supremacist terrorism. And then, you know, so for this, at this point, like, you know, it was just real. And I think what actually made it doable for me was the fact that I got to talk with all of these Black women and femmes and hear about and share, put light on their stories, you know, share what amazing things they've been doing. For once, you know, I got to write about it and then also say, yeah, I'm not just making you aware of how bad it is. I'm also showing you like this beauty, these beautiful people doing these things.
Yes.
And like, you know, that to me was like what I kept focus on. You know, I have to put the context in so that people who don't live our reality understand why this matters. But the highlight of it for me was saying at the end of the day, the answer, you know, I don't get to just say, let's all be fucking outraged. I get to say, here's how you can actually change that by making
Yes.
direct investments in the work that, you know, Black women are doing.
Thank you for that. And it brings me to my next question, actually, about making change in another specific area that I advocate for, just because of my mother's own issue with housing and then how that has transponded generationally, right? So, in the last chapter of your book, you wrote about a communal economy model, an extended family, the Green family that collectively shared and owned a number of houses together. So here at Restore, housing is a key issue, like our Rent for Moms campaign. As many are getting priced out of housing by corporate greed, what possibilities, and not just corporate greed, I think about people who are without houses to live in at the present moment. And I think about what is it, the HB 65? I don't know the bill number, but whatever the hell Ron DeSantis called himself signing and supporting. I'm thinking about all the ways in which housing and shelter is a right, right? But we just keep getting violated, and it's the most
Mhm.
marginalized people. And so I think about that, and I would like to know, what possibilities do you see for housing justice and communal solutions? Like, how do I feel like how do you repeal a bill like that? You know?
Mhm. It's a great question. And I would say, at the root of this problem, right, is the fact that our system, the right to housing, is in direct conflict with the very real truth that this is colonized, stolen land. Right?
Mm,
What does the right to housing look like when the people who founded this country had no right to be here? Like, whose rights, whose land, whose housing, right? And so they had to define it as moneyed, white people. And then slowly eking out from there in order to say that, like they say that it was going to be life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, not the pursuit of happiness, right?
mm,
And so that is really part of a colonization project. The idea that only that, you have to have this particular money and privilege to own a piece of land, and that you can own all of this land, and that's rights. And other people can have none, and that is also rights. That's
right,
all part of manifest destiny. It's all part of violent colonialism. It's what we see all over the world. And I think it's important that we recognize that that's why that is so strong, and why, those of us who come from more communal societies can look at this and go, what the fuck? How is it okay? How is
right,
it okay that we can have empty high rises of luxury apartments that no one lives in, and then people
right,
living out on the street? How is it we can pass laws that it's illegal to feed and care for people who are experiencing homelessness? Like, how is that all right? How can people snatch up, our communities, right? Because they're doing this in all our communities, our sick elders' homes, and
yes,
snatch them out of our families and turn them into developments that our people could never afford to live in, right? Like, because if we say that that doesn't work, then the whole colonial project of the United States doesn't work. And so I think that that's where it's really important that we start saying, where can we leverage our power as a community? And this is something that has to, I think, really happen on a community by community basis, and it can. And like what Wanawari in the book has been doing is amazing, because not only have they been, trying to honor this history that they had in the Green family of holding this property, not to become landlords, not to make themselves wealthy, but to make sure that their entire extended family had the financial security and the safety to build their own lives and to work together. And they built this internal economy. And now they're turning this into mixing the arts and saying that, our communities don't exist if we also don't have place for our artists to exist. And now they're teaching other people how to do that, right? And so it's like, oh, do you have a piece of land? Do you want to turn your land into a space where you can have multiple people, where you can have open art spaces, where community can feel safe and centered? Here's how to work with current legislation. Here's how to change the legislation. And I think all of the different ways, and it's going to be specific to our communities that we find this, and whether that's challenging density laws, right? Whether that's, working to loosen the rules that allow us to build on the property we have, right? There are municipalities like I believe in Oregon, there's a municipality where if you have a business that served a marginalized community historically, and that business goes out, the business that replaces it also has to serve that community. Like, that's an amazing way to like preserve space. And these are things that you can do community by community. And as we do that and normalize that, and then use that strength of community that then can't be moved, can't be dislocated, to build more, then we can start codifying it and
mm,
strengthening it and expanding it. And so I love when we think about that. And I would say that's a part where people are really inspired, right? Hear from people going, I read that chapter with Wanawari, and I absolutely want to build something like this. This is amazing. And what that space has meant for our community in, in a neighborhood that was rapidly being depopulated of its Black people and is
Yeah.
now a resurgence of community, what it has meant for the strength of our community and has brought people back to the community, and it has helped our creative community be able to, have money and have shows in community, has meant so much. But the project of getting homeowners together, Black
Right.
homeowners together, and saying, let's leverage our power, let's come together, and let's stop, letting people tear us apart. I think that that's so vital. And I think that, like, not only do we need to do this on a community by community level, we have to open up communication with other communities so we can
Okay.
share ideas and support each other and learn from each other. Because even though it's going to look different from community to community, we're all fighting the same forces at the end of the day.
Yes. I totally agree with you, and I'm glad you brought up the arts because as a poet, I was like, come on, when you wrote about BIPOC communities, you said the arts are the heart and soul of our communities. Art is a part of us. It is in our blood. It has told our stories. It has sung us to freedom. It has remembered our dead. It has shown our outrage. It has reminded us of what we are fighting for. Where do you hope readers take that in the future? And where do you want to go with that as a writer?
You know, um, this is like for me on personal levels, professional levels, it means so much. What was amazing to me when the pandemic started in 2020, everyone turned to art. Everyone turned to art, right? It wasn't just you were learning how to make sourdough. People were watching, plays online, listening to music, reading books. Books were selling everywhere, right? Art was what was getting people through. And yet no one was remembering that artists make art. So the
Mm,
community hit first and hardest were our working artists. That's part of why we built the Artist Relief Fund, was because, we were seeing our community, like me as a writer, my partner as a musician, everyone who had a gig, every teaching artist, every artist who had a
right,
show, everyone who had crafts, gone immediately. Like, Seattle was one of the first hit areas with COVID in the
right,
US. By March 15th, the people didn't know how they were going to pay their rent. And it was wild because I'm looking around and going, wait a minute, though. Everyone is watching these shows. Everyone's reading these
right,
books. People are watching live stream plays for the first time in their life. People are so desperate for art. It's getting us through, and no one is saying, what are we going to do to support the artists? And that was, a global phenomenon. But when it comes to our communities and what the arts have meant, like, it's even more intense. Like, that is our history, right? Like, that's how
yes,
we keep our history and keep things together. And yet we have this separation, we have this idea that art is magically dropped upon us, or that it's people who get to play around all day and not the people who are actually painting the pictures of our future for us. And we have to start appreciating it. And that means we have to divorce the arts from white supremacy. Because the reason why we can't support the arts right now is how intertwined with white supremacy it is. If you're an artist and you want to be in a gallery, like I wrote at length of how white supremacists and racists our galleries are, and how
yes,
they do not want to pay our artists. They want to steal our dead bodies. They want to steal our ancient artifacts, and then they want to platform white people. That is not the space where our art belongs.
right,
And, our art programs, our art universities are the most expensive schools you can send your kids to, and they're going to teach our kids white art.
mm,
That is not where we belong. And
right,
and so it makes sense that so many parents would say, why would you be an artist? You got bills to pay, right? Because they know what world they would be sending their young Black, brown, and indigenous artists into. And so we as a community have to say, we need this for our survival. This is how we understand who we are. This is how we move our movements forward. This is what keeps us together. This is what keeps us alive. So what does our internal economy around the arts mean? And what
mm,
does it mean to, use our collective power to hold these institutions that are exploiting our artists and erasing our art and stealing from us? What does it mean to hold them accountable as a collective? And that's just something I want people to understand. Every time that you're talking and sharing something online to try to explain deeply how you feel as a Black person, and you're sharing that imagery, an artist made that, you
mm,
know? And half the time you don't know the name of the artist that made that. And that artist got nothing
right,
for speaking to your heart and helping you speak to the hearts of others, right? They got bills to pay like anyone else. They got to survive like anyone else. And it matters. And when we think about like what we've been able to do in these spaces by sharing art, it has meant a lot to our movements for multiple generations. And yet we don't act like the artists do. And that is something where we have to reclaim it, because this art is in our lineage. This art is something that we have carried multiple generations. It is a thing that connects us, across language, across so much. And we have to start acting like that. And that means we have to start treating artists like they're valuable members of our community.
Ooh, that last sentence. We have to start treating artists like they're members, valuable members of our community. Thank you so much for saying that. I just have one last question. Because I know that you took a lot of, and again, I go back to the introduction, just to like bring it full circle. You were discussing how, when you turned from a reformist to an abolitionist, you were like, but I'm not this. So and writing this and learning what I've learned for the years that you've been a writer and organizer, it you like I've kind of like come into my own about how my efforts, right? And I thought that that was really powerful because everyone has a lane, right? And that goes back to my original question, but of all the justice work you shared with us, whether it be your own or whether it's some of the stories you shared in Be a Revolution, is there one issue or story that's exceptionally close to your heart? And are there some stories that did not make it into this book?
You know, um, I was able to share the stories of almost everyone I talked to, um, which I'm so glad for. I did have to cut a lot of work that I had written out around conflict resolution, which still hurts my heart because I think it's such an important topic for doing
You
this work.
you and Adrienne Murray Brown should write a book together on conflict resolution. Who knows? I don't know.
um, I think what was amazing for me was there, I did these interviews over the course of a couple years. Um, and here, as we are looking at a genocide in Palestine, watching the ways in which people have remained consistent, people who I didn't talk to anything about this issue, and watching them stand up and be outspoken and risking everything. And so what I'll always remember actually is interviewing Raphael Shimunov for the chapter in art, talking about all the subversive art he was doing, um, to draw attention to the ways in which, people were abusing Black and Brown communities and were able to maintain positions of power. He was doing stuff like, sneaking subversive art into museums and like stuff like that. And he was saying things like, I'm too old now to be arrested. That could, blah, 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 blah. The amount of times that this man has been arrested in protests for Palestine these last few months, and watching him do this, watching him be like, no, this is consistent with what I do and who I am. And so watching the ways in which it's like, if you live that life, you live that life, right? And you're consistent and you say, this is an injustice and I will be here. And that to me was beautiful to like watch people in totally different spaces, even like watching like Chris Smalls in this Amazon labor space being like, oh, I'm also going to speak out about this and I'm going to be right here because I know what injustice looks like. And I'm going to, even when it's inconvenient, even when it can cost me support and funding and all these things, I'm going to do this. That to me has been really beautiful because you check up on people. You want to know what the people you talk to are doing. And you really hope, because people are human, that like they're not going to do something like, really awful. And then to watch honestly in the last few months, the deep disappointment I've held with so many people who've been so silent and not willing to risk anything to speak up, to watch so many of the people that I spoke with through this book do the exact opposite and just run right into that fire and say, I am right here. This is what it looks like to live your values, has been beautiful to me. And they've all been doing it in different ways. They've all been doing it in ways that are true to their skills and who they are. So like Raphael's still creating subversive art, but it's about Palestine, and like you can download stuff that's critiquing Biden and you can put it up on the street if you want, like still doing all that. But it's, that to me, like it helped me remember, like no matter where you are, if you live by your values, there will always be work you can do, and there will always be a place for you in this work. And it's just been that's been a really beautiful thing to see in what has been, some really, really dark few months.
Ooh, thank you. I've been thinking about something you said in the book, and this is my last question. You were discussing just the different oppressions, and then hearing your answer to this last question, it made me think, what is our responsibility, right? When we remember, I said earlier, I need to collect some of my family, right? And so, like, I think about friends, I think about coworkers, I think about people I have to be in space and in certain communities with, right? Can a person, ever be a friend with a racist person? I thought about that to ask you when I was in the car.
Hmm.
And like, if so, like, how, like, what's the scale of racism? And then, like, I see this Palestinian occupation, and I raise you a lot of friends I thought I had and lost, right? Because I did not know that they were Zionists. I could have been their friend um, through their Zionism, but it was kind of like a slap in the face that you were all BLM the whole time. And now when it comes to another brown marginalized group, you're like, oh, but not them. And
Hmm.
so for the person who's looking to navigate these systems of oppression and not wanting to be gaslit, right? And decisions, I'm pretty sure, I think I read a post from you where you did discuss being disappointed in the people who do not speak up. How does someone who looks like me, someone who looks like you, navigate having to be around people with all these big, loud, wrong ideas?
Hmm. That's a really great question. And I would say this is
Yeah.
where, we have to navigate, like we have to take a lot into consideration, take our own humanity as Black people in. Like, so for me, a lot of, one, like there's just the moral imperative, right? Like this is so obvious, so real, that for people to look at this and say, absolutely, I don't, I'm not going to say anything, or even I'm going to support this genocide. Um, like, no, I'm sorry, I will not be friends with people who support a genocide, but
Right.
also recognizing a lot of these people were absolutely, like you're saying, a lot of people in like my writing world, a lot of like people who were pro-Black, BLM forever, fuck this system, and now they're pro-system, they're
Yeah.
pro, like,
You better
and
talk about it. Okay.
right. And so I'm like, not even, even setting aside my basic morality as a human, I know I'm sure as fuck was never safe with them. Never safe with them,
Okay.
right?
Thank you. Thank the answer.
Yeah,
Like,
because like the moment that I saw that, oh, they can toss away an entire population of brown people, of indigenous people, because it's inconvenient to them, because it challenges the way they see themselves, because it makes them uncomfortable, or they may risk something. No, I'm out. Because we all know that in the fight for Black liberation, that's gonna happen too. It's going to
hmm,
challenge what every non-Black person thinks about themselves. It's going to challenge their privilege. If they're really with us, it's going to put them at some risk. And so that's how I know, like, you know what, I'm not safe with you. I am not safe with you. And so I don't actually think you have to like hold any space there if you don't want to. I will say, though, where we can, because I didn't. I was heartbroken, hurt, and I didn't feel safe. And so I was like, no, I'm going to do my work where I know I can do my work.
right.
Where the line for me was, there were a lot of people who I could tell, right? Because we think about like how we grew up and the conversations around Palestine, right? We actually get to see for once from the outside what that sort of propaganda looks like, the same propaganda used against us,
Right.
right? I don't know what it's like to be white and to be a white person hearing all this messaging about Black people, but I can see what it's like to be non-Palestinian and think about the ways in which Arab people have been talked about. Think about the ways in which, people talked about even in the 90s, like all of the peace talks and stuff like that, and the ways in which Arabs were painted to be evil and untrustworthy, and the whole history we have learned about Palestine. And so I can look at that. And so for me, where I do hold space is for people who hadn't questioned that until now, and they're trying to.
Okay.
That's as far as I'll go. Where they're like, you know what? I am fighting. I have all of these urges because everything I've been told since I was a kid said that these people weren't trustworthy. And I know something's wrong, and I'm trying to fight it, and I'm trying to learn, and I'm trying to find out. I, as a non-Palestinian, can hold space for that because I do find the possibility of safety there. right? I want to know that someone can say, I do have this programming and I do need to figure out what's behind it. And yeah, it's annoying. It's so annoying to be like dragging
Right.
people along here, but someone has to. And I don't want Palestinians to have to, just like I don't want to have to drag white people out of their anti-blackness. I don't want to be the person. Go find you, a non-black person who's
To
further
do
along.
that labor with you. Right.
Exactly. And so I will be that person if they're along the way, if they're not endangering me, right? And so that's where I'm like, okay, I have had some people who are like, I just don't understand. Can I ask you some questions about this? Or do you have resources? Is there a meeting I can attend, a webinar? I've been holding webinars with
Okay.
Palestinian friends and family in order to discuss this for people who are confused. And that's really the line I draw. But it's going to be your bandwidth where you are on this. If you want to say, no, you know what? I just have to be with people who get it and just amplify voices, cool. If you have the capacity, feeling a little safer because you're not Palestinian, to talk with people who are starting to get it, I think that that's actually where we're really lacking people in that space. And I do worry if we have no one in that space to say, come here, come here, let me show you a little bit more, that people are going to be pushed back out. And I don't
Okay.
want that. And so that is for every person. That is not the job of Black people.
Yes.
That is a thing you can choose to do. But if all you do at the end of the day is recognize that what makes Palestinians unsafe makes us unsafe, you're doing a shit ton. And if all you do at the end of the day is say everything I do to make Black people safe makes Palestinians safe, you're doing a shit ton, because both of those are true. Absolutely. The technology that's shared, like a lot of people don't get, a lot of the police technology used to terrorize our community comes from Israel,
Yes.
right? So everything we can do to fight that here, if all you do is fight ShotSpotter everywhere that they try to build it, fight cop cities everywhere they try to build it, you are doing your part to make Palestinians more safe. So long as you don't politically divorce it, so long as you don't say it's not
Mm.
connected. And so I think it's really important to know that. Just like I'm not expecting Palestinians to be like, everything I do is going to be about Black lives, even though we've seen a lot of beautiful solidarity from
Yes.
Palestinian
Yes.
people for us. I know that everything they do to get free makes me more free. And I know a lot of Palestinians who feel the same way about us.
Thank you so much, as per usual, for spending time over here on this side. I always love that no matter where you are, that anytime I've ever called you and said, let's talk about it, you're like, all right, whatever, just schedule it with my people. So I just want to say thank you. And I wish you and your family nothing but love, success, prosperity, wealth, health this year. So I hope you have an amazing day. And thank you for spending time here. Ijeoma
Same.
Oluo,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you, everybody. It was always lovely to see you. And it's always lovely to see your beautiful family online. Your
Thank
little
you.
one who isn't little anymore. How did that happen?
I don't know. Egypt Delgado did ask me the other day. She said, "Mommy, what is a white life like?" And I said, I like, how do you stump me? And I'd be knowing white people. Like, you know what I'm saying? So thank you so much for everything. And I hope to talk to you soon. Take care.
Same. Take care, everybody. Bye.